It's 2010. Bungie are slowly working their way out of being part of the Halo franchise, while 343 Industries are slowly working their way in. From 2010 onwards, 343 were going to be taking over, and with that they would be in charge of maintaining what came before it and developing everything that came after it. So naturally, the first order of business was to ensure a collection of anime stories were released for everyone to freak the fuck out about. Oh my god! The stories were developed by several different studios, and as such there's a wide collection of animation styles on display to the audience, with each story focusing on vastly different stuff, from the battles humanity have suffered to the history of the Covenant to the downfall of the Forerunners, and even including some non-canon stories for shits and giggles. But how well are these stories told? Well, that's what I'm going to find out. Of course, while I'll be looking at small technical details and design concepts, I'll mostly be focusing on the actual plot and character motivations present in the stories. This is also quite a fun topic for me, so I'm not going to be super serious in this video, so hopefully as we go along we can all just have a good time with this. So, let's have a look at the stories and decide whether they deserve a level of praise that's higher than Venezuelan inflation, or if they have all the structural integrity of a poorly constructed submarine at the bottom of the ocean. First, we have Origins, which focuses first on the Forerunners and how they fell to the Flood, and then on humanity's history and its contact with the Covenant. Origins is a story that was split into two halves, like how the US was split between 1861 and 1865. And like the US during this time, the second half is a great big pile of shit.
Yeah, Negro!
The start of the story with Cortana analysing all the information she has on the Forerunners and detailing the history of their rule of the galaxy was very interesting, although I do wish that we had gotten a bit more depth to it, as it doesn't really give us any characters for us to root for or give us an insight into Forerunner culture, only showing us the architecture we've already seen, some robots, a few weapons and a couple of armor designs. And while that's cool to see, it didn't really add much to the mystique of the Forerunners, which feels like a missed opportunity. But I guess the narrative also tells us that Cortana doesn't have all the information. She's just piecing together what she has and coming to a conclusion. The same way President Bush cherry-picked evidence before taking action that definitely wouldn't fuck up the Middle East for the next 2 decades. One thing I did enjoy seeing is just how big of a threat the Flood were. Seeing a version of the Flood that hasn't been imprisoned for 100,000 years, fully at the height of its power and doing to the Forerunners what the Soviet army did to all the captured German women, gives us an understanding of how terrifying they are as a concept. It's not like they're pushovers in the games, but actually seeing them casually wipe out planets and take on the Forerunners helps to make them a lot more intimidating than the Flood forces that even the UNSC have a fighting chance against like in the games. Also, unlike the games that only really display the sort of monstrosities that could be created by the Flood in terms of the Gravemind and the Pure Forms, this episode doesn't hesitate to show us how fucked up the concept of an alien race that can twist and turn the biomass it consumes into horrible abominations, giving us a wide variety of different fucked up monstrosities, from ones with weird proportions to flying guys to Harvey Weinstein.
Stop being such a fucking tease, you sweet little twat!
And then we have the second half of the story, where it starts off kind of slow and boring, starts to get good, and then becomes a massive mess very quickly. It's the visual equivalent of having sex with a man with premature ejaculation.
Jizz in my pants.
This segment begins with Cortana going over some of the more historical aspects of humanity and their destructive nature, and while there's nothing wrong with it, it feels like something you'd hear just on a regular documentary channel. Ooh, leaders used to manipulate people. Ooh, no, the Greeks are fighting and slaughtering each other. Oh my god, millions of people just got Hiroshimaed. Whine, 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 whine. It's all she does in this part. It's just so fucking boring. As if we're expected to care about all the people being casually slaughtered throughout history. So after this absolute yawn fest,
Boring!
she actually goes on to more interesting stuff, such as how humanity spread across the galaxy, started to fight each other, and how they united after they came in contact with the Covenant. And I mean, yeah, it's shown to be pretty fucked up, showing humanity and the UNSC constantly being overwhelmed and overpowered by the Covenant. It's good, it gives us a glimpse of conflicts and events that we hadn't seen before in the Halo franchise, really helping to flesh out the universe. And then we get to the rest of the episode, which I think is bad for 2 reasons. Now, as I already mentioned, this episode is called Origins, yeah? So surely it should be focusing just on the origins of stuff that hasn't already been revealed in the Halo universe. It did a good job detailing the Forerunners, their war with the Flood, and the rise of the UNSC and their war with the Covenant. But then for absolutely no reason whatsoever, it starts to focus on the plot of Halo 2 and 3, which seems a bit pointless for an episode called Origins because we already know how this plays out. So this segment is about as pointless as literally everything Game of Thrones foreshadowed in its first 4 seasons.
Kind of forgot.
Shut up, you. And secondly, a lot of what we see when the Flood is brought up in the story is just a big old pile of bullshit. And Cortana would know this because she's lived through this. She would know that the Arbiter wasn't on high charity at the time, and he certainly didn't try and stab the 50-foot tall pile of mouldy spaghetti and meatballs to death. The UNSC and the Covenant didn't unite to stop the Flood, and it most certainly didn't unite them into peace. The game story was right there if you needed to fact check something.
Fucking job, you couldn't fucking do that!
Like, whose brain fucking wrote this? Mitch McConnell? And don't get me started with the whole Cortana is going rampant so she's not telling the true story bullshit excuse that they came up with to explain all this, because we've literally never seen another AI suffer from memory gaps and distortions because of rampancy. Like, even after 343 started to mass produce transmedia content and make an entire game involving rampancy, memory troubles aren't really brought up. It's one of those answers that you make up when someone points out that something's wrong with your story, and instead of just saying, yeah, we shouldn't have done it this way, Frankie decided to be like, well, actually, it makes sense if you blah 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 blah.
Shut the fuck up.
So then we get treated to this spectacle, which I think is supposed to show the camera flying through the universe and seeing the different stars and galaxies, but instead it just comes off as a dodgy LSD trip. We then see more shit that didn't happen, namely Chief coming across the Gravemind. Chief is about to shoot him for stealing his waifu, but Gravemind is like, aye Chief, it's me mate, I'm all done with your wank doll, you can have her back. And Chief is like, ah, cheers Jimbo, I sure hope she doesn't turn into a lying gobshite in the future. Why are they Australian? Fuck me. We then cut back to Cortana, who is
Face down, ass up.
She then, and I cannot stress how dumb this is, asks an unconscious frozen man if he can hear her.
You stupid bitch.
Realising he's asleep, she tries to grab his big delicious boobies while telling him that being a warrior is cool and top shit and all that, and he's really good at killing. Which I'm sure would mean a lot to him if he could actually hear her. Then it cuts to black. So yeah, in short, part 1 is interesting if undeveloped. Part 2 starts to get intriguing but quickly becomes incomprehensible. The animation is fine, but there wasn't really anything visually impressive to me, and the music was grade A stuff, which makes sense as most of it is either tracks from the other games or remixed versions of them. And so we conclude with part 1 getting a decent 6, while part 2 gets a generous 3. Get fucked, mate. Moving on from that, we get the duel, which a lot of people say is their favourite, and I can certainly see why. I mean, it's basically just, what if we took feudal Japan and put it in space? And as dumb of an idea as that might sound on the surface, it meshes quite well with what we know about the Sangheili, so I don't mind it. Anyways, we start off with a nice little boat ride as some dude enjoys a couple brewskis while having horrific flashbacks to his dead wife. Just casual boat stuff really, happens to everyone. As he begins to go for a nice midnight walk, he is taken by complete surprise by the heavily armoured dudes that just stood right in front of him rattling around like tin cans.
Coming.
As this Arbiter, Foul, starts to give them some free weight loss surgery, we get flashbacks to some wrinkly testicle telling him that he can be well rewarded and get all kinds of cool stuff from Loot Crate if he just blindly praises their beliefs. But Arbiter is a bit hesitant to do so because he heard that Loot Crate doesn't have the best customer service, so what if he doesn't like the stuff he's getting? How is he supposed to make a formal complaint? Foul finishes this dude before cutting back to his meeting with the Prophet, telling him that he doesn't want a Loot Crate subscription, angering the Prophet. We then cut to Foul chilling with his main girl.
Oh my god, what's wrong with your face?
Look, I get that it's very difficult to do expressions when things like cheeks and lips are removed, but why did anyone think this was a good idea? Making them look human for the sake of convenience just takes me out of it, especially as they have no reason to do this for like, literally any reason. So they're chilling together at this very bumpy dinner table when he tells her that she should probably just leave if she doesn't want to get murdered. She refuses, saying that they're husband and wife and that they'll be fine because women, am I right?
Women.
While he's busy trying to get these guys to not suck at fighting, he gets approached by his best mate Ro, as in... So Ro asks why he keeps trolling the Covenant Council and that he just needs to take a chill pill and join the local housing association. Val then says,
"We were strong. Sanghelios was strong before this covenant. And we could be strong once more. But we have strayed. We lived not for honor but for power."
And honestly, I think this is one of the best lines that can be used to sum up the predicament that the elites threw themselves into by allying with the prophets. The elites tried to merge their noble ideals and honour into the religious system of the Covenant, believing that those who are noble and honourable will rise through the ranks. However, instead it created a system where the most honourable are never given the chance to rise and do great things, with only those who show blind obedience, even if it means doing dishonourable actions, rising in power. Val here is highlighting that the Covenant have tricked them into believing that their status within the Covenant is the key to their strength, when they were already a strong force in their own right, and that they shouldn't let blind belief and loyalty rob them of that. It's a very simple but well put together idea, one that I can really enjoy, and now that I've spent the past minute being serious, here's a weird image of Catherine Tate. Ro warns Val that if he doesn't stop, the prophets will invite him to a 1v1 on Rust, with Val revealing that he'll answer that because he isn't a scrub. As they're talking, Mr. Hacker Snacker and his band of baboons ominously stare at them, the way that dogs stare at food when it's sat on the table. In the present, Val arrives at the designated fighting area, where a bunch of big meanies are waiting for him, who do a bunch of not nice things like try to kill him and call him mean names.
Curses Arbiter.
Val, who's really annoyed at constantly being bullied, decides to do what every teacher should be allowed to do to unruly students. Teach them a very physical lesson. We see in flashbacks that the Prophet ordered Hacker Baraka to get rid of what Val loves so that he'll have to join the Knives only 1v1. And he starts by getting Ro to kill the best babe for shits and giggles before killing him himself, leaving their bodies for Val to get mildly upset at. In the present, Val is doing to the Covenant forces what a volcanic burrito from Taco Bell does to my internal organs, violently fucking them up. And let me tell you that the animation really shines through in this fight. When it comes to the slower scenes, there tend to be less movement and less frames happening in them, leading it to be competently shot but nothing that wowed me. Meanwhile, in this fight it seems like they made sure to add as many frames to the animation as possible to give it a smooth finish, and it really pays off. After honourably killing an unarmed traumatised war veteran, Val continues on his mission to kill the man wearing the entire kitchen appliance section of a B&Q. In a flashback, he runs back into his house and sees that both his best friend and his wife are dead, leading him to cry out in anguish and start the events we saw at the beginning of the movie. To be honest, I find it a bit strange that this guy wouldn't just wait in the house and kill him when he gets there. He clearly doesn't care about honour, and you could just write him off then and there instead of wasting time and resources. But who am I to argue with the edgy alien samurai man?
While you were partying, I studied the blade.
Biggest weeaboo on the planet mocks Val for being too weak to save his side piece, with Val like,
Keep my wife's name out your fucking mouth!
As they get ready to start attacking each other, they start to get settled into position. But then I guess the internet connection wasn't too great, because then they get stuck in the same position for 10 seconds and literally do not move at all. Now, I get you want to build suspense for when they actually decide to make a move against each other, that's fine, totally works for these sort of fight scenes. But could you not have done a little bit of work and have at least the characters breathing or moving their hands slightly, just to indicate that they're designed to be just stood there doing nothing? When I first saw this years ago and the screen was on here, I unironically thought that something must be wrong with my copy of the video. I thought it had frozen. Anyways, both of them start attacking each other, leading them to get sliced the fuck up and for Val to start gushing out liquid the way I gush out liquid when drinking too much anti-depression juice. As he falls to the ground, his memory reflecting on his dead wife, with some passing semblance of justice having been given to her before his death. This episode does an amazing job when it comes to portraying the conflict of the Sangheli and their role in the Covenant. At first I was a bit confused about why the Prophet cared so much about the Arbiter and his opinion, but seeing as how this serves to demonstrate how the Arbiter's role was changed to what we see in the games, I think it does a great job with the source material. Not just complementing it, but expanding on it in a positive way. The art style and animation in general are very nice to look at, with the watercolour effect really adding to the feudal Japan vibes that the episode was going for. And the animation, while sometimes a little janky, is capable of offering nice, smooth segments in the story. So my only main problem is, there aren't really any characters for you to get invested in besides Fowl. And I know that there's some of you going, well yeah, that's the point. But I feel like this impact would have been a lot better if his loved ones had a bit more screen time, so that we could actually get to know them and see them interact with each other in the world. Also, this design? Really?
Disgusting!
And look, I get what it was going for, but I don't think the music is as great as it could have been either. I'm not saying that the music is bad, far from it. I really enjoy the music used for the big fight scene in the middle especially. But it seems like they're focusing more on making a samurai music over Halo music. It's good, but it's missing a little twinge of something that would have made it so much better. But as my heart isn't completely stone dead, I will be giving the duel a solid 8. If it had a bit more runtime, given a bit more depth to the side characters, and tweaked the music a little bit, it would have been a 9 or maybe it's a 10. But don't hate the player, hate the game, son. Next we have Homecoming, which focuses on Spartan Daisy and her attempts to evacuate a group of Marines from a planet that has been decimated by the Covenant. And at the same time we get flashbacks to her childhood, seeing her journey into becoming a Spartan. We open up on a montage of UNSC space while a narration details the history of the UNSC and how everything went tits up when the Covenant arrived. Now, I don't really have a problem with the narration itself. In fact, I think it's useful in providing information that people might have overlooked when playing the games. But who is this? Why is there just a disjointed voice that has nothing to do with any of the characters in the story? The narration would have felt a lot less disjointed for me if it was Daisy or Halsey who did the narration. I don't know who this dude is. We start with a bunch of Marines getting their shit pushed in by grunts and buggers. And I mean, they must feel really embarrassed that these are the two species that they're having trouble with. Imagine getting owned by the only two enemies that don't use shields. All seems to be lost until Spartan Daisy arrives on the scene, somehow doing more damage in 2 seconds of screen time than their entire squad managed to do in 2 minutes. Seeing Daisy do the miraculous feat of using her gun, the squad become motivated enough to actually try and shoot things, which is good because that allows them to not die. High IQ move indeed. After eliminating the enemies, Daisy decides to do a big high IQ move herself and take her helmet off in a war zone. Oh, PTSD! As she's answering a phone call for extraction, she recognises the voice of the pilot that is going to be picking her up, Ralph, before flashing back to Daisy's childhood. During this flashback, we are treated to some horrific scenes of low detailed character sprites running on the spot, as the group of kids have managed to escape from the Spartan training program. Daisy talks to Ralph and reflects on the horrible things that they've had to experience, before saying that she plans to go to the one place the UNSC will never find her family home, the place they kidnapped her from. Like, I get that she wants to go home and see her parents, but with all the places to go to first, and with your understanding of tactics and how the military works, why do you think you'd be able to just go home and no one would be able to find you? As Daisy starts to make her way home, we cut to the present with the group fighting off some jackals. And the Sarge keeps complaining and being selfish, like saying how he wants to go home and doesn't want to die. Stuff he just needs to stop being a big baby over. Daisy, wanting to stop having whiny little voices in her ear, decides she would rather split up and take on the Covenant solo than stay with them any longer, volunteering to be a distraction.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
We then have a flashback of Daisy arriving on her homeworld, then a flashback of her getting kidnapped, and then a flash forward of her doing Spartan training. And could we please just try and stick in one place for a little bit? I'm getting fucking whiplash from this story going all over the place.
Get the fuck out of my sight before I demolish you.
Also, you're telling me that of all the places that she could have been kidnapped, they decided to kidnap her at this very public park that has little to no cover to obscure their actions. Like, this park centre is wide open. Literally anyone could walk in and see Oni in the middle of committing fucking war crimes.
Not a great plan.
As we see Daisy and the Marines get prepared to
Get to the chopper!
and fight their way to the approaching Pelican, we have another flashback scene of Daisy discovering her home, only to be greeted by Robocop. Halsey flies up and explains to her that if 75 kids just randomly disappeared, the autists over 4chan would start making conspiracy theories and most likely uncover the Spartan 2 project, because that's what 4chan does. So instead they left an identical clone of all the kidnapped kids so that people wouldn't uncover the truth. We then cut to the present and we discover that these highly experienced soldiers didn't press the brake pedal when seeing a giant blue grenade on the floor, driving into the explosion and destroying their cars.
You don't deserve to live.
As Daisy attempts to get to the Pelican, it is juxtaposed with Daisy running to her Flash clone, having decided that the most logical thing to do to get back at Halsey is to execute her innocent defenseless clone. There's also a continuity issue here that fucks up the impact that this scene is supposed to have. So in this scene, Daisy walks up to the clone, pulls a gun on her, and then there's a tense standoff, with us seeing both the anger that Daisy has over how her peaceful life could have been, and the look of shock and confusion in the clone as she sees a copy of herself try and kill her. Now, this is a very effective scene that helps to emphasise just how many people's lives were ruined by what the Spartan 2 program did. But when Halsey is saying, "We cloned you, Lamau," we see that the clone looks up from her flowers, stares at Daisy, smiles, and then keeps cutting between the next scene and the present day stuff. So, as it's presented in the episode, the clone was in the garden, looked up, saw someone who looked just like her was approaching, smiled at her, then proceeded to completely ignore and forget what she presumably believes is a clone of herself standing on the bridge to sniff some flowers, and is then shocked again when Daisy approaches her. Like, if you just removed this scene would have made more sense. But as it is, it just comes across like the story was changed to be more dramatic and they forgot to cut this scene. In the present, Daisy somehow manages to get quick-scoped by a needler, falling to the ground.
Get fucked, pile of shit!
The Marines and Ralph, despite obviously not being able to lift several tons of armour, and despite being slap dab in the middle of a battle, decide to stay and try and help her, resulting in all of them dying. Strategic geniuses, everyone. In the flashback, as Daisy is prepared to kill the clone decides to fucking smile for some reason. Like, she gets over the shock of possibly dying to an unknown twin extremely quickly. As Daisy spares her and is prepared to leave, the clone wants to give her the toy bear that she had as a child, with us then seeing that Daisy and Ralph were transported back to the base, with the other two Spartans killing themselves. RIP. The Daisy clone died. RIP. And then we flash to the present where Daisy is now dead. RIP. We then see Chief arrive at the site wearing... I have no idea what this helmet is supposed to be.
Ah, look at the top of his head!
Like, I guess it's supposed to be the Mark 6 armor, which wouldn't exist at this point anyways. But the proportions are just all wrong. Like, what is this? Anyways, he sees Daisy sleeping on the job and he decides to tuck her in before continuing on his way. So, I enjoy the flashback side of the story. I think it does a good job at helping to show the fucked up morality of the Spartan program that people might not know if they only played the games. And once again, the music is good. But everything else? I don't think the animation is anything particularly impressive. We really don't get enough personality of Ralph or the other Sarge to care about them. Most of the fight scenes are just the UNSC doing dumb stuff, and there's small continuity issues that just take me out of the story. I'll give it a 5. I think it just needs a bit more flesh on the bones and to be a bit more defined, and it would have been maybe a solid 7 or 8.